After years and years of trying to correctly predict the United States 2022 World Cup squad, yesterday we finally got all of the correct answers. As Mr. Gregg Berhalter revealed the 26 guys that are going to be ready to compete in Qatar against the likes of Wales, England, and Iran. So surreal to think that it is just under 2 weeks away. But with that, we're going to be going over this roster, what we like, what we don't like. But overall, I thought it was a very good roster. Definitely a little bit of an interesting one with some very picks that could potentially be very risky in that World Cup. But like I said, overall, a very good roster. But yeah, let's get straight into that video. Alright, so we're going to break it down position by position. We're going to go from the goalkeepers all the way to the strikers, and then we'll have some of our exclusions and just our final thoughts. We'll have the video up from there. But yeah, let's dig straight into this roster. Alright, so moving on to the goalkeepers, we have Sean Johnson, Matt Turner, and Ethan Horvath. So the big thing here is there's no Zach Steffen. News broke on Tuesday night that Zach Steffen was going to be left off this roster, and we got the actual announcement. I think a lot of people were surprised because Zach Steffen had been the number one goalkeeper for the entirety of the cycle. Then the actual World Cup roster comes around, and boom, he just gets dropped like that. I think Zach Steffen, we as a fan base, overrated him a lot. Do I still think he's one of the best keepers? It's up for debate, but I would say he's probably third. But Sean Johnson, number 3, I don't really have a lot of problems with him. He's just a backup option if worst case scenario. Matt Turner is the number 1. My opinion on him has really changed a lot. I think he's gotten a lot better the past 2 years, in particular with his feet, and we know that he's a very good shot stopper, so he's obviously going to be the number 1 come World Cup. And then Ethan Horvath probably is the backup number 2 option. I still really like him. We know, as we saw against Mexico a year ago, if we need him as an emergency option, he can do the job. Not great with his feet, but he's still a really good shot stopper, and I still feel comfortable if he has to go in as an emergency replacement. So overall, the surprise Zach Steffen was pretty big, but I don't mind the goalkeepers. I think they're actually pretty good. Okay, so moving on to our outside backs, our 2 left backs are Anthony Robinson and Joe Scally, and our remaining right backs are DeAndre Yedlin, Shaq Moore, and Serginho Dest. Now the thing here is we only have 1 true left back on the entire roster, so that tells me, and we kind of knew coming in, that Robinson was going to be a 90-minute, all 3 of the group stage game kind of guy, and that's very good. He's been very consistent for us the past year and a half now, so he was obviously going to be the starter coming in. Joe Scally has been lights out for Gladbach for the past year and a half. While I don't think he's going to play in the World Cup at all, if not more than 15 minutes, I'm still glad he made this roster. I think it was very deserved. Serginho Dest hasn't been playing a lot for his club the past few months since he got that move to Milan. But once again, if he's healthy, he's going to be starting every single game in Qatar and going to be playing 90 minutes, I assume, as well. Some question marks about him defensively, but I think he's very good going forward, and he's very good in tight space. It just adds kind of another element. So very happy for Serginho Dest. And the last 2 are DeAndre Yedlin and Shaq Moore. While Yedlin, I don't really think he's a top 3 right back that we have. I'm glad he made this roster. You know, going from 2014, fast forward 8 years, he's made the roster once again. A very good leadership guy. He's friends with a lot of the guys in the group. I don't expect him to play at all in the World Cup, but still, it is what it is. And Shaq Moore, now I don't know if Reggie Cannon was injured or not, but this one was kind of a surprise. I think we all kind of expected Reggie Cannon, but it does seem like Shaq Moore made that final push to kick out Reggie Cannon to make this roster. Now I like Shaq Moore, but I don't think he's going to play at all in this World Cup. So overall, I don't really have many problems with the outside backs. I guess I just don't see the value of bringing 4 right backs and 1 left back. I think could have just easily dropped one of these right backs and added an extra center back just for some more cover. But it is what it is, and I don't really have too many problems with it. Alright, so on to our center backs. We have Walker Zimmerman, Tim Ream, Cameron Carter-Vickers, and Aaron Long. So obviously, Miles Robinson has a torn ACL and was never going to be recovered in time. And Chris Richards picked up a hamstring injury about 2 months ago and just wasn't able to get back to fitness before this World Cup started. So that was a shame to see 2 guys who would have been in this roster had they been healthy go down with injuries. But nonetheless, Walker Zimmerman, he's going to be a starter in Qatar. He's been very good for us for the past year or so now. I hope he has a really good World Cup. Tim Ream, this one was kind of a surprise. I think a lot of fans want him to be on the roster because he's been lights out for Fulham in the Premier League, which makes sense. You have a guy playing at a very high level and playing consistently as well, a guy who has some good leadership. He's very old. He's been with the team for a while. I'm not the biggest fan of Ream. I don't think he's very good in the high line. He's not very good in transition, and he does seem fairly error-prone just to make a stupid mistake here or there. But once again, I get the call-up given the injuries that we have to this current pool, and he's a good leader to have. I don't expect him to play in the World Cup much, if at all, but I don't really have a problem, once again, with him being on this roster. Cameron Carter-Vickers, if he was healthy, he was going to always be on this roster. He got his first cap under Berhalter all the way back in June in the Nations League and the 2 friendlies against Uruguay and Morocco. I think he has some decent qualities, but he's not as good as either Robinson or Chris Richards. He would be my starter next to Zimmerman if I had to choose one, but once again, I'm not super high on Cameron Carter-Vickers, but I'm happy he's on this roster. And then we have Aaron Long. I think if you've watched this channel, you know that I don't really rate Aaron Long. I just don't think he's very good with the ball at his feet, and just hasn't been the same since he tore his ACL. But once again, coming into this roster, we all knew that he was going to be here, and I do expect him to be partnered alongside Walker Zimmerman in Qatar. So all I can say is I just want Aaron Long to do really well. He's worked really hard to get back from the ACL injury. If it were up to me, I wouldn't have called him up. But once again, you got to cheer on your guys. You got to hope that they do their best. So these are the 4 center backs. And I do expect Zimmerman and Long, like I mentioned, to be primarily getting most of those minutes. On to our center defensive mids. This one is pretty straightforward, and I'm not going to spend much time on it. But it's Tyler Adams and Kellen Acosta. This is the most straightforward position in the entire roster. They've been the 2-6s for basically the past year and a half now. Both have been very deserving of these call-ups. I think Tyler Adams has been very good for Leeds United over the past 4 to 5 months, and he's going to be very important to our success in Qatar. Kellen Acosta is a solid backup option to have who can play the 8, although I don't expect it to happen at all in this World Cup. But once again, 2 very deserving call-ups, so let's go on to the actual 8s, the box-to-boxes. So we have Weston McKennie and Yunus Musa. If they were healthy, they were always going to be on this roster. I do expect them to start all 3 of these games alongside with Tyler Adams in that MMA trio. And then we have Luca De La Torre, Christian Roldan, and Brendan Aronson. So Luca De La Torre picked up an injury a few weeks ago, but was able to recover from it. He's not quite 100%, but I'm glad he's on this roster. I think he can be a good option off the bench. Just a guy to have in your back pocket. He's very comfortable with the ball at his feet and is very good at one of those 8 spots. Christian Roldan, another player who I don't really rate, but I expected him to get this call up the entire time. Now, supposedly he's a very good guy in the locker room, adds a lot of insight, and it's just friends with all the guys, just adds a lot of good vibes, is what they like to say. So my thing is, I know I don't rate Christian Roldan, and I do think it's nice to have your best 26 players. But at the end of the day, in this World Cup, I don't think there's going to be more than 17, 18 guys that actually get on the field. So why not bring some guys that help with the entire group? I think Roldan has worked very hard. So it's nice to see him get called up, even though I wouldn't have called him up myself. But glad he's on this roster, and I hope if he does touch the field, he does the best that he can do. And then we have Brendan Aronson. Now, he is listed as a midfielder, but I'm not going to look too far into that because the past few camps he has been listed as a midfielder. But I do expect him to play most of those minutes on the wing when he does come off the bench in most of these games in the group stage. So overall, a solid-looking midfield group, and I just don't really have too many problems with it. So on to our wingers, we have Christian Pulisic and Giovanni Reyna. Very, very straightforward. 2 very important players to our success in Qatar. And then we have Timothy Weah and Jordan Morris. So I expect Pulisic, he's going to be starting every single game on the left. And I do anticipate him going 90 minutes every single game. Reyna, seems he's pretty close back to 100%. He's been playing a lot more now for Dortmund, consistently starting at least a game a week. So very, very glad, a guy who I think can play as a 10, an 8, or as a wing. So very versatile. And has just a lot of talent, just so good on the ball. It's just crazy to believe he's still 19. So we're going to see a lot of Gio Reyna in this upcoming World Cup. Now, Tim Weah, he's got his first call-up all the way since June. So very, very happy for Tim Weah. He has been lights out for us for the past year or so. Ever since he got his first opportunity in qualifying, when he touches the field, I just think he adds another element to the U.S., the way he's able to stretch the back line and just anticipate plays before they even happen. So if he does elect to start that McKennie, Musa, Adams trio, this winger selection for me is very, very tough to choose because you're not going to bench Pulisic. That's just not going to happen. A guy who's been there years now, has loads of experience, has stepped up many times in the clutch before. So that leaves you with 1 spot on the wing. So it's between Reyna and Tim Weah. But the obvious answer is Gio Reyna because, yes, he's the more talented player. But Tim Weah is a guy who I think if you put him on the field, he's going to help your entire team. He really replicates the game plan that Berhalter wants to play, and I think it gets others way more involved. So Berhalter's going to have a really tough problem on his hands if it were me, deciding to start Gio Reyna or Tim Weah. Both of these guys are deserving of starting 11 spots. I know Reyna can play in the midfield, but I just don't anticipate it. And finally, on to Jordan Morris, another player who I'm not super high on, especially after the second ACL tear. But I'm glad he's here. He's worked really hard to get back on this roster. So if he does touch the field, I'm going to hope he does his best. But I was really surprised to see Jordan Morris over Paul Arriola. Paul Arriola just seems to be rated more by Gregg Berhalter, and I do think Arriola right now is a little bit better than Jordan Morris. But I do think the reason for him getting left off is because I think Arriola is a lot similar to guys like Weah and Brendan Aronson. But Jordan Morris is a guy who I think is more explosive, and if you were to put him on the field, I think he has a little bit different of a play style in comparison to Paul Arriola. Is a guy who, if you bring off the bench, he can be a guy who can just get into that mixer and be an aerial threat in the box. So overall, I'm not super happy with the call-up, but I hope if he does touch the field, he does the best. A guy who's worked really hard and has been with the program for a long time, so I'm not going to complain too much about Jordan Morris. So on to our strikers. All right, so finally on to strikers. We have Josh Sargent, Jesus Ferreira, and Haji Wright. So Josh Sargent has been lights out to begin the first half of the season for Norwich so far. Very glad he's on this roster, just a very well-rounded striker. I hope he's going to play a lot at the World Cup. Jesus Ferreira, I don't really rate Jesus Ferreira as much, but I did anticipate him to be on this roster the whole time. He seems to be Berhalter's number one, at least this year in 2022, and I do anticipate him to start at least 2 games in Qatar. Now, Haji Wright was, I think, the big surprise here. I think everybody kind of anticipated Ricardo Pepi, but the news broke about an hour before the roster that Haji Wright was going to be on this roster, and I just think it left everybody stunned because on one hand you had Pepi, a guy who had just had a really tough first half of the year with Augsburg, got the move over all the way to the Eredivisie, and just started playing lights out, just looked completely more confident, looking a lot like himself, like he was at Dallas. Now, Haji Wright, on the other hand, he's been in good form, but I just don't think he's the same player as Ricardo Pepi. Isn't as good, but I guess Berhalter decided to go with Haji Wright. I guess he did say that it was between Ferreira and Ricardo Pepi and Haji Wright and Jordan Pefok, so that one was definitely a little bit interesting. I'll talk about that more in a second, but overall, I think you got 3 strikers, all a little bit different profiles. Sargent's more well-rounded between Ferreira and Haji Wright. Ferreira's a guy who's going to drop into the midfield and just kind of play, make, and try and get on the ball when he can, although I have some serious questions about his final movement and his finishing. Haji Wright, on the other hand, I think he's good in transition. His hold-up play is decent. Off-ball movement is fine. Finishing is good. I think he can score with his head and with both feet. And I think he's also good going 1v1 as well. But once again, I just think the big thing was Ricardo Pepi being omitted. But I'm not... It's tough because I would have put Ricardo Pepi on this roster. I think he deserved to be here. But I'm not also completely outraged either. I do like Haji Wright, but I think it's definitely interesting. I think Berhalter went with a really gutsy call here, so we'll see how it pays off. Alright, so on to the quote-unquote exclusions. Now, these aren't personally guys I would have called up. These are just guys I think I expected to be on this roster that weren't on this roster. So first up is obviously Zach Steffen. Was number 1 for basically the entire cycle. I think Berhalter rated him as number 1, and just boom like that. He was kind of cut. I do think he's one of the top 3 goalkeepers, but I think Berhalter saw something else. I think his stint at Man City, not playing week in and week out, definitely took a toll on him, and he just wasn't able to be the same like he was back in Columbus. Reggie Cannon and Mark McKenzie were 2 guys. I think Reggie Cannon in particular had been with Berhalter since 2019, had been on every single roster, could field it as a center back or as a right back, and I just think his versatility would have put him there, but nope, I guess he went with Shaq Moore instead, so that was definitely surprising to see. Mark McKenzie, I think he was probably the last center back cut. Has been in a lot of camps under Berhalter. I don't think he's great, but I still think he was better than Aaron Long, so I would have at least liked to see him over Aaron Long, but it is what it is. Malik Tillman, Paul Arriola, and Ricardo Pepi. Now, Malik Tillman, I think everybody knows he's kind of good, but I think a lot of people have serious question marks about his work rate. He's good on the ball, but he just doesn't really seem... It just almost looks like he's not trying at times. I heard a lot of Rangers fan, and when I have watched him for Rangers, it just doesn't seem like he has the same mode as some of the other guys in midfield or out on the wing. Paul Arriola, like Reggie Cannon, has been in basically every single camp since 2019. Was one of those great guys. In my honest opinion, I think he is better than Jordan Morris, so I didn't have a problem with him being on this roster, plus I anticipated it, but I guess with Jordan Morris, just to give him a little bit of a different look in comparison to both Weah and Aronson, because I think Paul Arriola is pretty similar to Weah and Aronson. And Ricardo Pepi, in my opinion, was probably the biggest shocker. If it were up to me, yes, I would have gotten Ricardo Pepi, a guy who I think is probably the most well-rounded striker that we have, has been in really good form. What is it called? Grow? I don't even know what it's called, but he's in the Eredivisie, playing really good. I think he has 6 or 7 goals to his name, but I don't know. Berhalter went with a really, really gutsy call in Haji Wright, so we'll see how it pans out, but I just feel for Ricardo Pepi, a guy who just had saved Berhalter's job all the way back in September, seemed to have been his number 1, played in many, many qualifiers, finally got the move in order to basically put himself back in the picture, and just to be cut in the final roster, it's kind of heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for all these guys, man. Just guys who have put in so much work, had been in many camps before, just to get cut on the very final roster. Very tough to see, but that's just the harsh reality. So we'll go on to my final takeaways. Like I said throughout this video, overall I thought this was a very good roster. I don't really have too many complaints. I know a lot of people try and pick at maybe spots 23 through 26, but at the end of the day, only about 17, 18, 19 of these guys are actually going to see the field in Qatar. And I do think there's some value in some of those later roster spot guys who add the leadership, locker room qualities. There's definitely some value in that, so I'm not really going to get too worked up over that. I think the big things were Zach Steffen being omitted. I don't really have a problem with it, even though I would have taken him as my third goalkeeper, but I think Sean Johnson, Horvath, and Matt Turner are definitely very deserving as well. I did expect Reggie Cannon, but saying Shaq Moore, I like it. I like Shaq Moore more than Reggie Cannon, but I was a little weirded to see 4 right backs and 5 fullbacks, and then Reggie Cannon not being on that list, so that was definitely a bit of a surprise. Paul Arriola being cut for Jordan Morris, I think was definitely, I didn't expect it, but I do see where Berhalter's coming from, and I don't mind it either. But the big thing here was Ricardo Pepi missing out on this roster, I guess technically for Jesus Ferreira, but Haji Wright coming in as well, so that was definitely an interesting call by Berhalter. We'll see if it pays off or not, but some different skill sets in there. But again, I don't think how you can leave Ricardo Pepi off this roster with the form he's in, the way he's been at least been able to play for the national team when we're playing well over the past year or so. So we'll see, man. Definitely a high risk, high reward. But very glad to see the main guys, except for Chris Richards. So sad he's out injured. But Pulisic, Reyna, Adams, McKinney, Weah, they're all here. They're ready to show up on the world stage. It's been 8.5 years, so finally we are back in the World Cup, and it's just under 2 weeks away, man. I'm so excited. With those under 2 weeks away, I'll try and have some more videos out on the channel, say 2 or 3 a week, leading up into that. So make sure you're here. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, in the comments down below, let me know what you would have changed on this roster and what you don't like with any of these picks and what you would have changed. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.